Space. The final frontier. These are the voyages of the starship Enterpod. Its continuing mission: to explore strange old films, to seek out new flicks and review them incessantly, to boldly go where several have gone before.
When you said you want to do the intro, I didn't know it was going to be a goddamn Star Trek thing, but I'll take it. We're the pod people.
It's relevant-ish.
And we're back for our part 2-year birthday spectacular. I'm Big Baby Beppino, Matisse Van Rossum. And hey, I'm assimilating the human race over here.
I may look like Ben Sheets. I may talk like Ben Sheets. But I'm not Ben Sheets.
Get off my podcast.
Well, I think you all know me as... Cleveland Mosier. How's it going, y'all?
It's pod time again. We've been waiting, we've been hoping, and those pods, we got them. And we are the pods.
We got pods for days.
As we stated on our last episode, tonight we're covering Invasion of the Body Snatchers from 1978. Correcting myself from last episode when I kept saying 79.
Tisk, tisk.
I know, I should be fired.
Mm-hmm. You're already canceled.
I'm already canceled, so let's just go ahead and do the final death blow. Yep. So this film is directed by Philip Kaufman, and it stars Donald Sutherland, Brooke Adams, Jeff Goldblum, and Veronica Cartwright.
And Leonard Nimoy. Let's not forget.
Nimoy. That's right, we definitely can't forget Leonard Nimoy. When seeds drift to Earth from space, mysterious pods begin to grow and invade San Francisco, replicating the residents' bodies one at a time. This is a great movie. Just get that out there right now.
That's an understatement.
Yeah.
Once again, y'all really picked a great one. I said it last episode, but now I feel it.
Well, Tees and I
there's a reason why.
had both seen this movie before.
Yes.
This is your first time, though.
That is correct, and what a watch.
It's been years since I've seen it, and I had forgotten a lot of the great details, and in a lot of ways it was like watching it for the first time again. It's still just such an exciting, spooky, tense, sinister film.
Yeah, agreed. Well, the interesting thing to me is I had seen this movie a couple times before, but I had never seen it so close to the original. So it surprised me how many things they pulled from the original in terms of like plot points.
Parallels.
It's
parallels, yeah.
It's a very faithful adaptation, made with love, but updated and modernized, and I think is better for it.
It might be one of the best examples of a remake I could pull.
Absolutely.
It's ideal in every respect. It pays homage. It absolutely has its own voice. And it stands on the shoulders of a well-established giant. Just well done. Well done movie.
Yeah, definitely. Philip Kaufman has only directed a handful of films. I haven't seen or heard of most of them, but what is interesting is that Philip Kaufman wrote the original screenplay for Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Excellent.
If you look at his writing credits on IMDb, every single Indiana Jones property, including the video games, he has a writing credit on because he created the characters. Wow. So
that's actually surprising because I remember hearing so much, and this is a tangent, but hearing so much of Lucas and Spielberg brainstorming ideas for the Indiana Jones movie.
Yeah, and, I'm sure it seems like they were just working off of his original screenplay, I think. And I had always thought the same thing. Like when you think of Indiana Jones, you think of like it being Spielberg and Lucas's baby, and I think it is in many ways. But
well, like all films, there's such a collaborative work, but so much of the credit goes to the directors.
But Philip Kaufman wrote and directed this adaptation of Body Snatchers, and it's frankly kind of surprising that he hasn't done more of like real renown, or that he's not more well regarded, because I think this film is a masterclass in direction and writing too.
Yeah, absolutely.
I can't agree more. It just left me, when you're eating like a really nice meal, and it's probably been a while since you've had a nice meal, and you're about halfway through it, and you're already sad that you're going to have to finish the meal and that you can't just keep enjoying it.
forever and ever and ever.
That's how I felt about halfway through this film. I was like, oh man, this movie has to end at some point, and then I can't keep watching it anymore. Like, I just want to run it again.
Well, as we talked about in our last episode about the original film, that one was a very tight 80 minutes, no fat, pretty brisk pace once it picked up, and just kind of relentless. And Ben, you had talked about wishing for more time to sort of breathe, and I had said that I wish that there was more with sort of examining people being wrong and something being different and sinister about them. Wish there was a little bit more of that. I think that this film addresses both of those concerns.
Absolutely.
It's about 40 minutes longer than the original film. It's 2 hours. It has significantly more space and a slower, deliberate pacing, but it's so spooky from the very beginning, and you get a ton of people behaving strangely.
Yeah. It's a fucking feast. It's so rich with little details.
Well, I was going to ask you, Cleveland, when I brought that up in the last episode, you expressed a concern about it not being subtle enough and that it might hurt the low-key spookiness of the film. How do you feel when it's done that way in this one?
I'm so glad you asked me that. First off, I just have to say that literally every complaint, well, except for one hilariously tiny detail, literally every complaint that I had in the first film was addressed exactly how I would have hoped they would have. It might focus more on the pods immediately, but I think that's called for. Or at least on the relevancy of the invasion. Like, even then, we just see them as the small pods. We don't see their full horror. But even after the same sequence that occurs in the prior film where we get them in the garden, and we see them for what they really are as they bloom and the people emerge from them. Even after that, when you see people carting the pods, they're done in shadow and secrecy. Even when you see like them in
it's at
large amounts, it's at night. They're always covered in shadow. There's still an elusive mystery to them and a weight to them also.
Yes.
Which is quite nice. They're carrying them under their arms.
It feels like there's some effort to lift them, like they have some mass. Another complaint from the last one that they fixed.
Yep. There is a constant state of foreboding mystery. The rules are still established as well, but they're established through much more organic means.
Yes.
The dialogue is exquisite. But to cover your question, I love the shit out of it. I thought this is how you do cosmic horror, and you can see the influence this film had on so many of my favorites as well, like Annihilation, for instance. Like in the prior film, their purpose inherently is the same. The same can be said that they are sort of act as like a cancerous growth. In this film, that point comes so much more home, especially because we see them at the beginning as these just sort of organic creatures. And
they seem way more sinister and dangerous in this one.
Yeah.
And alien, too.
Yes.
I think a part of the charm of the original one, not to like shit on it, is that the pod people do still seem like people.
Well, that's the thing. Like, I was going to say, when we introduced the pod people in this movie, it's less subtle just because of the juxtaposition with our leading actress's husband in it. Like
Jeffrey.
Yeah, Jeffrey. He's super into Golden State Warriors and is watching basketball constantly.
Right.
After the transformation, it's just a night and day shift.
Right. Well, the first time she realizes something wrong is when she's like, "Oh, are we still going to the Warriors game tonight?" He's like, "Oh, no, I can't. I gave him the tickets to one of my patients." She's like, "What?"
It's not subtle in characterization, but it works because,
Right.
It's not about that subtlety as much.
Like you said, there is a day for night shift. Well, Brooke Adams is, I love that in this film, she and Donald Sutherland kind of share the protagonist role. So we see a lot from both of their perspectives. And similar to the original, he's the one who sort of requires a lot of convincing that something is wrong. In this one, we get to see a lot more of her sort of exploration and investigation of what's going on. Like her following Jeffrey to all of these mysterious meetings with strange people in like fields and in alleys, and like passing these strange wrapped objects back and forth between each other.
Isn't that exactly what I was requesting? Like in the the last episode.
Yeah.
Like, how great to just have that. Oh wait, look, someone has done
Well,
Sorry, I can't even talk
it's
right.
really
I'm just so excited over this
interesting
film.
because it kind of reflects the cultural norms at the time. Like in the 50s, you know, it was more common to treat women as subservient and not necessarily believe them as much. And in this film, women's lib happened a little more.
There's
you
a
know,
little bit of progress.
Yeah, no, there was some independence there, but some of the themes, you know, the Cold War had cooled down in a lot of ways. So it was replaced by stuff like pop psychology in this movie in a really interesting way.
Leonard Nimoy's character, the psychiatrist, the celebrity psychiatrist.
Well, yeah, and we were talking about shrinks in the first movie.
Yeah.
Cultural opinions of them definitely changed between the 20 years in an interesting way.
They handle that really well in this movie as well because Leonard Nimoy is a pretty big part of it. He's in a lot of the movie, but because he's supposed to be like this logical psychiatrist, like man of reason, he's not particularly emotional himself. So the fact that he has been a pod person all along, by when they finally reveal that, it is a little bit more ambiguous because you can't just write off as like, oh, he must be one of them, he's emotionless. It's like, well, no, he's the skeptical character. You know, he plays that role of trying to calm them down and tell them that nothing's wrong, but really just so they don't find out the grand conspiracy.
Now, do you believe that he was with them all along? I believe so. Because like you do see him interacting with some of them.
I think he's been a pod person from the beginning. And when he interacts with some of those other ones, they sort of explain it off as like, well, he's a celebrity psychologist. Like, people know him, you know? Like, he treats the mayor of San Francisco, you know, he's one of his patients. They easily explain that away, so you really don't know whether Leonard Nimoy is one of them for a long time. And I really like that. I like the ambiguity of that.
And what a perfect actor to get for it, too. You know?
Spock.
Well, and having watched a lot of that, there is still a key difference in his roles. He isn't playing the same, like, emotionless character in that he does in Star Trek. Like,
yeah, I haven't watched a ton of original Star Trek, but he definitely feels more
human.
Human
in this film. He feels like a human who's been corrupted. He doesn't feel like an alien that only uses logic and you know is always a computer. He feels like something that's trying to hide that. And that's quite impressive to have such a subtlety of range and not just fill the exact same role, which is almost certainly why they hired him.
I remember being like very pleasantly surprised with his performance the first time I saw this movie, because I really only had experienced him as Spock, and even then only in passing because I've never been a Star Trek person. Having that idea of him as just this sort of like very flat, emotionless kind of cardboard character, and then to see the subtlety of his range in this movie, where he's still playing like a sort of cold, logical character, but it feels like a person.
It hit a lot of like ooey gooey sort of special moments for me, because my association with Leonard Nimoy growing up was his voiceovers for book on tape radio series called Alien Voices. Where they would do audio recordings of like H.G. Wells narratives and such, you know, and then later on with Star Trek as well. So that just Leonard Nimoy is just always sort of represented like astral horror to me. He's so good at it. He just encapsulates like all that wonderful sense of deductive reasoning of the things that cannot be deduced.
I saw a trivia tidbit that I thought was really funny and also kind of stupid. We all commented on it, that like weird leather like half glove that he's wearing that looks like an archery glove.
I've seen it before in old films, and I
was reading about it before we started recording that he specifically requested to wear that so he would be more of a distinct character. Because he had a friend who wore one to like cover a burn or something on his hand to keep it from like getting irritated. So he was like, yeah, I want to be a more distinct character, so let me wear this like distinctive thing. It's like, dude, you're fucking Leonard Nimoy. You're already the most distinct figure in the movie.
Yeah, I mean, we pointed it out though, so mission accomplished, I guess.
I suppose so. That and Donald Sutherland's wool tie. Like thick knit wool tie. Weird. The 70s were a weird time, man.
But this film does an incredible job of encapsulating the 70s. It almost felt like a remake that was made now to a Stranger Things almost degree of an attempt to encapsulate the 70s. You have like the street performer who is just like essentially like a Bob Dylan type with a banjo. He's doing like, like city folk.
His banjo part was played by Jerry Garcia.
No shit.
Yeah.
How about that? Yeah, there are just so many subtle moments, like of course the mustaches and just all
all of the mustaches,
those dingy alleyways and like the cinematography. It feels so
flared pants legs,
and it's all the good elements of 70s cinema and pop culture too. It never feels like overplaced or they're just trying to make it a time capsule movie.
Well, it's like quintessential 70s.
Yeah, well,
horror.
the thing I love is not only does it nail the aesthetics of urban 70s excellently, it also takes the idea of Body Snatchers from the 50s and reimagines it into the cultural ideas of the late 70s, where instead of communist paranoia, it's more about the fear of the death of the counterculture.
They do use the term conspiracy multiple times in the movie, which is something else that I wanted to bring up in that same vein. Because though the Cold War was still happening, like you mentioned earlier, but it had significantly cooled down at this point.
Mutually assured destruction was pretty assured.
Right, and the invasion of the commies was somewhat less of a fear than the 50s. And, this is around the same time that we're getting stuff like Taxi Driver that's like really emblematic of post-Vietnam fear and mistrust of the government and paranoia.
Well, it's funny.
And Nixon and the idea of a conspiracy.
This film was shot by the same guy that did Taxi Driver. The cinematographer was the same. But yeah, but especially with the end of the 70s, in post Vietnam, that's when the rise of the professional class and the businessmen and corporate culture really started, and it carried on to the 80s and 90s in a big way. And I think seeing the effects of Vietnam and kind of the death of the counterculture and the peace movement after Vietnam really affected this movie in a lot of ways and thematically.
I think you're absolutely right.
No, I'm not at all surprised, and I'm really keen to learn that it was the same cinematographer as Taxi Driver, because it has those same moments of just lightning striking out of the shadows of this, like the figures' faces out of the dark, just like Caravaggio's paintings, which was the intent with Taxi Driver. I love that. It's just my favorite.
Well, yeah, it's really well shot. I love the style. It really so perfectly captures feelings of paranoia. There's a lot of sort of off-kilter cinematography, a lot of Dutch angles, a lot of underlighting to sort of make people look skeletal and weird, and multiple sequences, the first one with Brooke Adams and then later again with Donald Sutherland, of him walking around the city, just sort of having a meltdown, who is a pod person and who isn't. It's all handheld and, sort of rocking like a boat.
Yeah, absolutely.
And,
well,
it really makes you feel they're everywhere. They're all around me.
It's definitely an off-kilter feeling, and the tone is set so well. One of the small elements that I really like of it being set in San Francisco is a lot of the streets are set on hills.
Right.
So you're at an angle, so you get this weird off-kilter effect where, is it a Dutch angle? Is it just a hilly street? Sometimes they'll make it so the character is kind of sideways, but the street is
level.
Yeah, level.
And it'll have the camera tracking up or down to really emphasize that horizon line sort of sinking and raising again.
The sequence, for example, they're at the book release for the psychiatrist.
Leonard Nimoy's new book.
You get the excellent sequence where Donald Sutherland is on the phone trying to get the police, and Jeff Goldblum is trying to talk over him. But you have this fantastic,
Funhouse
distorted,
mirror.
funhouse mirror. And it works so well with
Yeah,
the
I love
ideas
that.
of, the altered self.
A lot of mirrors in this film and reflections used.
Yeah.
Like,
And
there are,
silhouettes
like
too.
at least 6, like, or 8, like, mirrors and reflections, if not well more. And on that specific note, literally every sequence in this film just contained shots and just singular frames that would have been the highlight singularly of any film. This movie just has one banger shot after another. I mean,
it's
just
really, really well shot.
phenomenal composition. Everything is so intentionally placed, not only for composition but for like color use as well. Like the shower sequences, most of the curtains in the shower rooms are like kind of an alien, like dull green and yellow. But there's the sequence with when they're looking at the body, and one of those shower curtains has this like kind of scale like pattern on it, and it's taking like a large third of the frame, and just these, you always are getting these like plants and like very intentional alien textures. And it's the kind of shower curtain you'd see a lot in the 70s, but just the lighting on it, the way it's portrayed, it just feels like reptilian and
So
like unfamiliar.
alien, yeah.
And they keep doing that with everyday objects in this movie. And what makes it so powerful is like Wes Anderson often gets applauded for like his like idyllic framing and how his shots all look like Norman Rockwell
it's all
paintings. And
symmetrical
it's all
and-
symmetrical, and
yeah.
everything in it is intentional. This film, you can credit it for the same thing, but every element of it can be excused away and still feel genuine. It's so masterfully like hidden as well at times. I mean, like the funhouse mirror-y sort of stuff in the background is very apparent, but it's very like sumptuous, and it's a weird mirror in a building. Like it's the kind of thing you would see in the 70s.
Well, the thing about
it still
too-
feels, it doesn't feel out of place.
Exactly. It feels like it belongs there, but it serves as a way to sort of warp your perception in the way it's placed in the frame. Which,
Realism enhanced.
It's very intentional. It's not
Totally.
vanity.
Yes.
Or masturbatory, yeah.
Which is a big problem that I have with Wes Anderson. I'm not going to go off down that tangent, but I agree with you. Like, the art to, like, placing things very intentionally in movies is that you don't notice how intentional it is, that it just feels natural, and it makes you feel exactly what the director wants you to. That's this film in a nutshell.
Yes.
Like, I always feel like I'm being guided along, and that I'm like meant to feel all of these specific things. Like, it just feels like a good video game, that takes you right, where you need to go, and you hit all of the right feelings.
I kept catching myself like in the middle of a sequence, like not remembering how I got there, because there's so many like interlude shots and things that it becomes so nebulous and flowing.
Which is great because they can't go to sleep or the pods will get them. So once they really start to get sleep deprived, you feel sort of sleep deprived along with them. You definitely lose track of time.
Absolutely.
Which is really, really excellent. It just increases that feeling of paranoia and tension and fear. It's like, if you can't keep track of time, how long have I been here? How much time has passed?
Well, and they make that threat of falling asleep very real in this movie. One of the complaints we had with the original was it was kind of nebulous in the rules of that, where like if you fall asleep, who knows how long it takes. In this movie, we see it directly. Jeff Goldblum falls asleep and his double's eyes open
Immediately.
Yeah.
You mentioned it earlier, Cleveland, that set piece, the location of the mud bath spa is awesome. I love everything there. It's so spooky, especially once they find the body.
Yeah, and I love those characters as well, like Jeff Goldblum, and then also
I totally forgot Jeff Goldblum was in this movie.
Yeah, and he's delightful.
He's great.
And he plays like a sort of a similar character to his usual ones, where he sort of rambles a little bit.
He's very
and does his
Jeff.
thing.
Yeah,
but he's very good at that, and it works quite well.
He's definitely a bit of a comic relief in this movie, especially towards the beginning half of the movie.
His wife is one of the either the manager or works at the mud bath.
I think they own it.
I believe they do, yeah.
Because it's the Belichick mud baths.
Right, that's correct.
So they own it.
And
his wife, played by Veronica Cartwright, who had an absolutely banger couple of years with this movie, and then the next year, Alien.
Yeah.
Oh my God, you're right. That is the same actress. Awesome. Yeah, I really liked her characterization, and the dialogue front to back in this movie is ace. It's so genuine and believable.
Yeah.
Our protagonist mumbles a lot, and it feels like a quiet, underspoken person. It doesn't feel like poor acting. It just feels like he's playing that kind of a guy. But with Jeff Goldblum and with Veronica Cartwright, there's a sequence later on when they're really coming to the realization of the creatures that they exist, and they're trying to rationalize them. She is the one to bring up oh, it's like the aliens that came in the past and like genetically bred the apes and stuff to be, it's like the Anunnaki sort of bullshit thing. And it's like, she's the perfect character like in that group to bring it up, because she's just like a civilian. Like she's the one who she just like runs the mud bath place. Like it's not the scientist, who brings that up. How nice is it?
Well, and once
that we
again,
get that parallel with like people who aren't just military, like I'm Mr. Scientist Man. They're civilian scientists.
And it's a further extension of the idea of conspiracy. And sort of like wild theories, quote unquote harebrained theories. What I love about her character in this movie too is, while she is sort of one of the more just sort of like freaked out by what's going on, like she has a hard time like getting a hold of herself through a lot of the beginning part. I love that they don't just relegate her to that role like they do her character in the original one, where she's just like the hysterical woman who needs to continually be sedated, where she is the one who actually figures out that you can hide among them by pretending to not have any emotions and just like sort of blending in, which is a great scene when they run into her again after they've been separated. And it's like, there's that minute like, oh, is she one of them? Is she about to like start shrieking and pointing at them? And then she's like, no, I've been hiding among them for hours. It's like, yes, fuck yeah, awesome.
And she does it so well that she ends up being the last survivor.
Yeah, well, I mean, we see her successfully do it again a few minutes after that when they're all trying, and Brooke Adams is scared by the man dog.
Oh yeah,
which is excellently done.
Awesome.
The effects in general in this movie are really excellent, but I was really taken aback by that dog. It's very The Thing or The Fly in terms of body horror.
Well, they have that moment in the last one, we didn't talk about it at all, where they're trying to blend in, and then like a dog runs out into the street and almost gets hit by a truck, and like that's what makes the girlfriend like cry out and show emotion.
What a great way to parallel that.
I always thought that. I thought in that part it was like a little trite. It's like you really can't control yourself to like that degree. But in this one, like a dog with a man's face walks up to you.
Especially
like,
when it's established, like we see them pass the hobo on the street, or the street performer with his dog, and I think they crush the pod. So
well, yeah, he like kicks it, and something comes out of it, but
which means like they fucked up its processing, and that's probably how that dog the thing was made.
That.
Or so
that
even that's even explained a little bit.
Or that there's I thought it might be just because there's only the one pod and there's the two of them sleeping right next to each other, so it kind of absorbed both of them. But you might be right. It might also have to do with
he fucked up
Donald
its process.
Sutherland kicking it when they walk past. But yeah, that moment is such like a shock too, because we haven't seen anything like that up till that point. Like we've seen some really gross, horrifying stuff, but then it's just like a fucking dog with a man's face walks up, and we're also just like, what the fuck?
Yeah.
And Brooke Adams believably also reacts, and they have to run, but you see that Veronica Cartwright
holds fast.
She has no reaction to it, and she keeps moving in the line. So it's like she's been doing it for hours, so who knows what kind of horrible shit she's seen. So she's like, she knows how to keep herself under control. I think it's excellent touch.
I have a point that really struck out to me, and that is the audio. I mean, first off, the phenomenal score, but also just the Foley.
The sound effects.
Yeah. And in particular, there is the sequence where Donald Sutherland has to, or recognizes that there is an imminent threat, and he goes back to Brooke Adams' house to warn her or rescue her. Mm-hmm. And he sees the husband, who is most definitely a snatcher. So he recognizes he has to break into the house. Plenty of movies before and after have done the stealth sequence, where we have our protagonists like having to slowly make their way around the monster or past or whatever, or through a scary sequence. And so often in those, while their protagonist is sneaking around, they just cut the audio entirely.
Yeah.
And they give you silence. When you know that they're walking on like old floorboards, they're moving objects, and you'd get those little sounds. And this movie gives you all of that. It doesn't give you like just like any moment of pure quiet during those scenes. You're listening tentatively.
Well, he's
kind of
clomping around too in general.
Well, he starts out by breaking a window.
Because as they established earlier in the film, Jeffrey wears big headphones to when he watches basketball games on TV, because Brooke Adams doesn't like listening to it or whatever. She's usually reading or studying or something. So yeah, he sees him through the window with his big old headphones on, and just like smashes the window. But he's just like clomping around because he doesn't have to be quiet. I think it's nice. It's a nice subversion.
I like it too, because I think Sutherland, like, he still like wraps his hand, or he uses like his elbow or like cloth to try and break the glass. So he's still trying, but like, you're breaking glass. There's only so much you can do.
Yeah, and also you don't want to just do it with your bare hand. Like,
also, yes,
it's glass.
That's how you get.
So, like, he's putting thought into it, but there's still like kind of a sloppiness that raises the tension. But you hear like the latch pulling and like all those little things and the creaks and the floorboards.
One of the little
so
details I really loved about that is, for a second as he's sneaking up the stairs, we get a cut of what the guy with the headphones is watching. And it's just like clocks.
Yeah.
He's just watching the clock.
Yeah,
you know?
he's just faking it like the pod people do so well, just blending in. To your point about the sound effects and the sound work too, Cleveland, the sort of like pulsing heartbeat sound when like the pods are growing and developing that they always play. The sound guy who did the effects, I forget his name. But his wife was pregnant at the time, so he built that sound off of a recording from an ultrasound when they went to the doctor. So he used that and then built and layered on it to make that.
Which is perfect.
Yeah, because the little fetus pod babies are growing in there.
Man, that sequence
disgusting.
is excellent. When Donald Sutherland falls asleep outside and there's that group of pods
just
that
all around
slowly
him.
emerge. That scene specifically of Donald Sutherland's double coming out of the pod as like a large fetus. Almost.
Yeah, like
it's
a big
just
slimy baby.
Yeah.
We were talking about in the last one how great the greenhouse scene is, where there's, they use sort of shadow and like the foam to hide a lot of the shortcomings of the effects, and how it works really well in that. On this one, we get to see everything just like fully, and it is really gross.
It's wretched.
The effects
All
work
is
awesome. Yeah, like just absolutely disgusting. Very organic and
like Cronenberg reminiscent.
Yeah, kind of.
And so
this is really before just before Cronenberg's heyday.
Well, I love it because it brings out those same feelings I had when you watch Tetsuo's transformation in Akira, like with this giant, like horrible, like fleshy baby that's, because like infants are so strange, and alien to us.
Yeah,
especially if you're a guy in your mid-20s. It's like, am I right? Kids scare me.
Yeah, babies are gross, man. No offense if you're a baby and you're listening to this.
Yeah, of course. Hashtag not all babies.
In that case, goo goo caca.
In that case, you're a fine-looking baby. Proud of you.
Good job. It's another tool in the box for bringing out that horror of the self, of the horror of your own species.
Well, what I love too is just like the added touches of detail. Like if a pod duplicate of you is forming, there's like your skin sort of starts to like flake a little bit. It's almost like they look like they almost have like a sunburn. That's especially great in that scene when Donald Sutherland is asleep outside, and you can see like the little pieces of skin on his face like blowing in the wind and like pulling off. It's just like, it's not super exaggerated, it's not super over the top. Like, you get all of the really intense visceral horror with the pods themselves
Yeah.
forming, but just like that little added detail, seeing the effect that it's having on the person who's being duplicated in their body. And we do actually get to see what happens later on when Brooke Adams finally succumbs, which is another thing we mentioned last week, that like we don't ever see what happens to the bodies, and like that's okay. But in this one we do, and that's also okay. She just sort of like caves in on herself and like crumbles.
And it's so well foreshadowed with the garbage trucks.
I
Yes.
love that.
So well done. It reminded me of adapting Soylent Green, but
Right.
with like the scoop trucks.
I love Soylent Green,
It's
though.
not-
That's
a
a
delight.
movie we should cover at some point.
Well, for a different reason, right? Like Soylent Green is delightful, and we
Yes.
should. You're absolutely right. And it also ends with our protagonist, running amok mad. There are people, but the garbage trucks and like the weird like lint material.
Yeah, it's
in
like
them.
hair. We see that the pods sort of have like this hair-like quality to
Like
them.
a fiber that you would see on plants. Yeah, the hairy, fibrous sort of quality. All of the
And we see
the
that-
tangible effects of the
we just
pods
see that
are
like
very
in the
plant-like.
background through like all the movies, just like garbage trucks, just like with just mounds and mounds of this like weird linty hair, and they're just crushing it up.
Almost burnt, like charred.
Which I guess you could probably reason is just like a combination of the remnants of the pod and probably also the bodies of the originals,
Oh, yeah.
just like all collected together in a fucking dustbin.
Well, we can definitely collect, that it is the remnants of the bodies after seeing what happens.
Yeah.
She just crumbles. And it makes sense to like their skin flaking off because it's a chemical reaction, so there's going to be a lot of heat.
And also it's just
They
like
break out into sweats and
well, and the pods are like absorbing like an integral part of yourself, so they leave you like a husk. It's
not just psychic in this one, and I appreciated
yeah,
that.
man, the effects work is so good. It's so creepy and subtle when it needs to be, and then really not subtle also when it needs to be.
But then afterwards, like after that sequence where we really see it for what it is, we go back to the pods still being kept in shadow and
Yeah.
mysterious.
In the fucking then he goes into the fucking pod factory and just absolutely wrecks shit. I saw that Donald Sutherland insisted that he do all his own stunts in this movie.
Excellent.
Fucking big
Worth it,
baller
yeah.
mood. Apparently, he came very close to getting caught in one of those fireballs when the factory is exploding.
Rad.
And that whole part where he's like climbing up in the rafters and like cutting the ropes with the axe, he wasn't wired up or anything.
No
like,
way.
he just, yeah.
Because like the rafters is one thing, but like right after the rafters when they're chasing him, like he's going along the wall.
Yeah,
like,
and
the
there
outer
were
wall.
no wires or anything.
Yeah.
Donald Sutherland just out there swinging his big old dick
And his wool tie.
and his wool tie. Before we get past the effects, there's one thing I do want to mention is the very beginning. The
Oh my God, please,
introductory
yes.
scene.
The opening credits.
Let's unpack that.
The opening
please.
credits, unlike the first one where we don't know where the pods come from until exposition later on when they're just like, we drifted from space, which we still get with Leonard Nimoy talking later in the movie. But the very beginning of the movie in the opening credits is we see like the alien world and these weird jelly-like tube things
There's a whole
drifting
medley
off into space.
of effects that they use, and it's all real. It's all tangible and analog. And to establish something so foreign and alien to keep with practicals is a feat in of its own. But to do it
Yeah.
so precisely,
I don't know what they're using for like the actual organisms themselves.
here's my guess.
Okay.
I would reckon that they shot it in a tank.
Oh yeah,
That's
no,
what
that's
I
what I was
thought,
gonna
yeah.
say.
Underwater.
I don't know what the organisms themselves are, but it's definitely underwater and it's reversed. The footage is
yes,
reversed.
that as well.
And they have these delightful like glass matte paintings of planets behind, and it
And like smoke.
having watched a lot of Star Trek recently, like this being from around the same era, like it does such a modern good job.
It's
of
a very
capturing an environment.
It's a very
the
adept way to
the budget is just astronomically more for this movie, but like such incredible kudos to it. Like you could release this
Well, it
that
feels-
sequence now.
Well, it
and would
holds
be
up so well
equally
today. You
effective.
know, like
feels
one
really
of the
alien,
one of the
too.
only minor things about something like The Thing is the beginning with the UFO. It hasn't aged the best.
Right.
Where a more abstract approach like this
So much better.
is so timeless.
And they even acknowledge that later in the script. Veronica Cartwright says, "Why couldn't this be aliens? Why are we always waiting for men in metal saucers? You know?"
But Jeff Goldblum,
And he's like,
"Oh,
I'm not waiting for men in metal saucers." That's exactly to your point, Ben. Is like it is truly alien, and showing us that from the very beginning, something that we can't comprehend. It's so cool. But like even the continuation of that once we get to Earth, and then it shows just like close-ups of like all of these different plants. It's establishing like a leafy sort of imagery. And then we see like the little tendrils growing into like these little buds on plants.
which looked so
It looked awesome.
good.
The effects are great.
Like you see the growth come out from nothing, from the gooey substance, and it really feels like it's growing out and reaching its tendrils in real time. And it doesn't feel like puppetry. Like it looks like a growing alien substance.
Yeah.
And I think they did it by like having a small pin poked, like a hole
Through the
behind,
leaf, yeah,
and then
for
they
sure.
push it through. But like the way it spreads out, like perfectly, like organically, is incredible. Wow, so good. That opening sequence with like the weird like mist tumbling off the rocks, you know, because they had it underwater, so like the weighted milk, you know, the milky effects. Tumbling down. It's just such good astral horror where there's like just gelatinous sort of entities sort of floating about, and again they don't
Drifting through
feel
space, yeah.
menacing. They just exist. They're cancerous. And I think a lot of modern cosmic horror could take a lesson from this. It's so much spookier than like just your big collage, wacky, crazy festive imagery. Just keep it simple with these weird organic shapes. And that's a new favorite like
it sets
intro
the tone for the
sequence
rest
for
of
me.
the film so well. It's like they're like, no, we're gonna show you what this is from the beginning, but it's done in such a way that it doesn't feel like it's over explaining. You just get a sense of the weird and of the alien, and it feels like a threat from the very beginning. Because the first thing we see after that sequence is Brooke Adams picking one of the pods off the leaf and taking it and, you know, carrying it home. And we see a group of kids in the park with a teacher, and the teacher's like, "Oh, there's some more flowers, kids. Go pick those flowers." So it's like we immediately know, it's like, no, they're here. They're already here. Great segue for fucking Kevin McCarthy's fantastic cameo.
Yes.
When Donald Sutherland and Brooke Adams are driving around and a crazed man appears in the street, running into people's cars and windshields, screaming, "They're here! You're next!" And when he comes to the window, and sure enough, that upper lip ain't moving. It's Kevin McCarthy.
It's your boy.
He's
back.
It's maybe one of my favorite film cameos ever. The perfect level of like, hey, look who it is, without being like too in your face. It's like just the perfect little nod, and like.
Well, because I mean, it's a retelling, and it's that same instance, but we're getting a retelling from someone else's perspective. So you can imagine that the same events of the prior film, you know, happened the same way to him,
Right.
just, you know, in the 70s instead.
I like to imagine that he's spent the last 20 years just running through the streets of America, just bouncing off of people's cars.
Just took him that long.
Yeah, it took him all that time to work his way up to San Francisco. He got caught on a bus and dragged down to Mexico for a little while and had to start over.
Excellent.
But the way they end that too, with him running off around the corner, and we just see just like a massive crowd of people chasing him, and then they turn around the corner and just see him like lying dead in the street with a pool of blood. So spooky.
Well, yeah, the fact that
Horrifying.
everyone is just standing there,
They're all just standing there
staring
looking at him. Yeah,
you know.
exactly.
And there's
Such
a moment,
distance to it.
There's a moment foreshadowing that earlier, going back to the incredible sound design, where several of them are talking in the street, and throughout this entire scene, there's always been background ambience. But there's just this one moment where they're talking. I can't remember what the dialogue was, but and then just like the sound just dissipates. and then it collects back up again, and you just get a sense that there's some living force outside that just needed to stop for a moment and do something else and move on. Those things in the background are just constantly there.
Well, yeah, you get that great scene where Brooke Adams is walking to work, for example, and behind her in the scene, people are running away, and like,
oh yeah, there are just like a couple people on the street just like sprinting.
Yeah,
just in the background.
If you ever lived in New York or like any like large city, like you see weird people doing weird shit all the time, so you don't
It'd
think
be
about
like
it.
that.
Yeah, it just do. And
but
I
in
love that.
context, it adds so much to the film, you know?
Right, well, because we as the viewer from the beginning know that something is wrong here. So it's just like seeing those details in the background. It's like, yeah, the characters in those scenes wouldn't think anything of it. They don't know something's wrong yet, but we do. So it's like that those added touches just make it so much sinister for our benefit. Also, just like when they're walking around and in the background, you'll see just like groups of people all just like sort of follow them with their heads, just like stop and just like watch them. And the characters don't notice it all the time, but we see it.
And something's just always slightly off.
Yeah.
It's never, like apart from like someone's just like running or doing something strange. Like it's never so unusual. It's always something you could shrug off, but just wrong. And a great moment to bring up another comparative modern film that is certainly standing on this movie's shoulders is It Follows.
Oh yeah.
Like the just so immediately comparable, and why both of these films are so effective, because it cues you in. There's the dramatic irony where you're aware that something is wrong in the background, and it teaches you to look for them and to make it almost a game, and to engage you in the film to find those horrible things. And it paces them out so well that they're always such a surprise when they come across your vision. And yeah, you can really see the influence on It Follows, and again, like Annihilation, and like some of these other modern films that I love dearly. It's cool to kind of trace something back to the source.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, even, this film is in a lot of ways paying homage to films that came before it. Not even just the original Invasion of the Body Snatchers, but I love that as like the language of film, that it just kind of, you can really follow things much farther back than you'd think, the influences and the way they translate and evolve through time.
Most definitely. I would also definitely bring up a lot of like Hitchcock comparatives with this movie, because Hitchcock did several of those sort of invasion style films, and he was always so good at guiding the viewer, and like to exactly what he wanted you to see. And this film carries those same hallmarks.
Yeah, you're right. I think about
Vertigo is probably like one I would think of, because it does the same, like makes the same attempts to unsettle you.
Or even like The Man Who Knew Too Much, or like the 39 Steps, where there's some kind of. And The Birds, when there's some kind of, or even something like, it's not Hitchcock, but like something like Ministry of Fear as well, where there's sort of like a shadowy force at work in the background that like you don't know who you can trust or who's a part of it, or whether they're watching you right now or not. Yeah, so you can trace a lot of that stuff even farther back.
One thing I want to talk about a little bit is the ending.
Yeah,
so this
sure.
movie is much darker in its ending, I would say, than the original.
Absolutely.
And some of that is recontextualized because it is in an urban city rather than, a more rural town.
We really get to see the scale of the invasion in this film much more so than the original.
Yeah, and there's less hope for stopping it in this film. Like, by the time...
even Donald Sutherland even sees a little before the ending, right before Brooke Adams becomes a pod person, but he sees a bunch of pods being loaded onto a ship at the docks. Mm-hmm. So we already, we knew this was spreading to other towns, because they have the same scene of them distributing the pods and telling them, like, this group go to this town, this group go to this town.
And the way he's drawn to it with just hearing music and thinking... emotion, a person,
same
real
way,
people.
Another nod
like,
to the original.
And in this case, it's great because it's accidental.
Yeah,
it's just them leaving a radio station on, and when he gets there, it changes to something else, and then I think it just becomes static.
One thing I want to mention about that, it's super minor, but earlier in the movie, Jeff Goldblum is playing with the radio and saying none of the stations are working.
Oh yeah, and then there's definitely a radio later on.
It's a minor
point. I
plot
didn't
hole,
notice that.
but
You could almost see that as a
really
world building point where like the radio station is being assimilated at the time, and it's being reassimilated, and that's why the stations are suddenly
Could be.
changing again. But they're changing strangely.
Definitely.
I think it almost works.
But to your point, Ben, he sees the pods being loaded onto ships, and so like we know that this threat is, if not already global, it sure as shit is about to be. And I think that absolutely does make the ending much, much bleaker.
Yeah, well, and the final sequence as well.
Even before the final sequence, the lead up to that, the way that that's all handled, where after he blows up the factory, you know, we see him hiding in the docks from you know, the pod people, and you know, we see them looking for him, and like one sort of like looks into his hiding spot with a flashlight, and you know that the light transitions us to daytime, and he's like at his job, and he's looking at everybody, and we see that they're all pods, so it's like, oh, what is he? He's just trying to blend in, and then runs into Veronica Cartwright in the park, and she calls out to him, and he
Squeals like a pig, boy.
squeals like a pig and points, and then it cuts to credits, which is great. And we were talking about how out of context, like using that as a reaction gif is so funny.
Because I've seen it many times
it's
without
an
knowing what its
iconic
context
shot.
was.
Right.
And out of context, it's hilarious.
Yeah, just because Donald Sutherland's face is ridiculous. Also, not having the sound when you have it in just GIF format, where it's just the face.
But even with the sound out of context, it's pretty funny.
It's still pretty funny.
However, in context, it's really effective.
It's terrifying.
horrifying,
and,
yeah.
Like I only saw it like comedically and found it to be hilarious beforehand, and even with that, suddenly having a realization, like as the scene is beginning, like, oh wait, that's what this GIF is from. It still caught me off guard and left me unsettled.
Yeah.
Like once you put context back to it, it becomes horrifying.
Well,
again.
it truly feels hopeless at that point. You know, like it feels like they have won. All is lost. We've spent the last good chunk of the movie with Donald Sutherland alone, you know, after Brooke Adams has succumbed and he's having to fight this on his own, and it's like he's fighting a losing battle, but he manages to strike back and destroy one of their pod factories, you know? It feels like a decisive, victorious blow, and then to just like have that at the end where, you know, Veronica Cartwright finally thinks she has a friendly face, somebody who's still human, and to have that ripped from her and us as the audience at the same time. It's a fantastic revelation and a great place to end the film too, to just go to credits from that.
Most definitely.
It's like, yeah, she's done for.
Yeah, it's game over at that point. One thing we brought up last episode was talking about how you could modernize this film, recontextualize it, and we recognized that it would be very difficult with the use of cell phones and the use of like just being able to get a hold of people immediately. But this film actually kind of solves that problem on its own because the pods land en masse.
Yeah.
Whereas in the first one, it's one pod, and it slowly grows out, you know, and affects the town. As everyone is slowly assimilated, and they're carrying the pods from place to place.
Right, we see that they're like delivering pods to specific people. So you also get the impression that there is a
little bit of both.
There's a sense of organization behind it, that they're getting the pods to the people who need to have them first. They're assimilating the right people first so they can prevent the spread of hysteria and like the revelation of what's happening until it's too late. They would get like politicians and police and people like Leonard Nimoy, like people who are respected
figures of authority,
get them first, and then it's too late.
You're immediately put under the impression that roughly half the city was captured in that first night.
Probably was,
you know, as opposed to one or two people. That makes all the difference in the world when it comes to stopping the spread.
Well, it feels more like an invasion as well.
Yes.
It really is the invasion of the Body Snatchers. I love the scale. I like the charm of the first one, having it set in a small town and having
it feels more like a noir.
And having like the doctor,
mystery.
know everybody. It works for that, but it's great in the remake to see it from a larger scale. I think that is a lot of what contributes to the just general bleakness and sort of nihilism of the film.
And when it's set in a city, you get those strangers, unlike like how the doctor in the original knew so many people.
In a city, you don't know even close to everybody, so you really can't tell.
Yeah, and the original like does a little bit with like the horror of the mob, with them like running down the hills as they escape the town. And this film just fucking starts with it. Like we get just so many incredible sequences encapsulating that feeling of an entire mass wanting to devour you.
Yeah.
And, so spooky. So spooky.
Very spooky. I especially love that through a lot of the big chase scenes at night when they're being chased by mobs of the pod people, they keep it very dark, and a lot of it is done in silhouette. So it's just sort of like the mobs of these faceless forms just chasing them, and they're all shrieking. In the first one, they have like the bomb alarm, the air raid siren going off when they're on the hunt. But in this one, the pod people are their own siren.
Well, and what I like is that we still get to hear a cool siren, and that's as he's destroying the factory. They still set off an alarm.
Yeah,
there.
That's true.
And really cool audio for that effect too, because like they didn't just do like one type of alarm. They have like 3 tracked over each other, and one's been like augmented a little bit. Like they're very alien sounding alarms and very very off putting. Excellent stuff. Very jarring.
Yeah, I love it. Do you guys have anything else?
No, I think that's all my thoughts.
It's so rich. I just want to make sure I've covered all my thoughts on it.
I think we've given a pretty solid rundown of the great stuff that this film has to offer. There's a lot more that we could talk about, but I'd say at this point, like if you haven't seen this version of Invasion of the Body Snatchers, it's worth prioritizing. I would say
it's a must.
Yeah, absolutely.
I guess I'll give my rating first. I won't rehash too much of what I've said, but this is a really masterful film from every angle, and it is a film that should be seen and prioritized if you haven't seen it. It's going to be a perfect 5 for me. Like, easy. I don't have to think about that.
Yeah, I think this movie reimagines the themes of the first movie and recontextualizes kind of the plot into a different era. And it also uses cinematography and style to harmonize with that excellently. The sound design and music is awesome. It's a 5 for me.
I did remember one complaint I had about the previous film that was not matched. The heroine in the first film, when they're on the run, doesn't take her heels off. And she keeps stumbling, and the heroine in this film does the same thing. She keeps her heels on for her entire run. She's also running through an industrial yard, so it's a little more believable, though.
But yeah, you're going to get nails and stuff
in your feet, yeah.
And
so
Cleveland,
I buy it, but...
Cleveland, feminism is running in heels.
Well, damn, you got me there. Well, in that case...
Canceled.
Yeah, you know what? You're right. I'm going to have to give this movie a 5 out of 5. No film is perfect, but this film is definitely perfect for me.
I would say that this is a pretty perfect film.
Pretty damn close.
Yeah.
We're right on the edge.
Yeah, I'd be hard pressed to find any complaint about this whatsoever.
I agree.
Yeah, so that's another perfect 5 out of 5 film. We've been on a roll with those lately. We've had a lot of them, but that's why we wanted to talk about this one for our second birthday spectacular, because it's a film that is worth talking about.
We're called Pod People for a
Exactly.
reason. And now I really know why.
This is a 5.
Oh, wonderful. Right on our anniversary.
5-star film, and we're a 5-star podcast, baby. You know?
Because of you listeners.
Because of you.
Thanks, y'all.
And on that subject, if you haven't given us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcast, why not?
What are you waiting for?
What are you waiting for? One of us. One of us. One of us. Become one of the pod people and join our invasion. And yeah, we would really appreciate if you'd give us a nice rating and review wherever you listen to your podcasts.
And of course, just like the seeds in the night, share it with your friends.
Exactly. Help us spread like an infection. Let's all become irony-poisoned cinephiles. Let's do it.
Hooray!
Hooray!
You too can feel no emotion.
Exactly. One of us.
One of us.
Dead inside. Dead inside. You can follow us on Twitter at PodPeoplePod and also on Letterboxd at letterboxd.com/PodPeoplePod. There you'll find the list of all of the films we've talked about on the show with our average ratings and links to those reviews. And you'll find the rest of our perfect unanimous 5-pod rated films, The Hallowed Halls of the Golden Pods, available on Letterboxd. You can follow me on Twitter at Mr. Van Awesome.
I'm at Mr. Sheets.
And I'm occasionally tweeting for at Light Arc Studio for It Stares Back, our delightful indie horror game, which I'm sure you've checked out and seen at this point. Go give it a whirl if you haven't. Hit us up on our Discord, and we will say hello.
Well, before we can sign out, we do have a little bit of business to deal with. Ben, tell us about what we're going to be seeing next week.
Oh, yeah. So
Shaking up the order of things a little bit.
we got a little bit of a special event next week. We have a screening of The Stuff, which is one of my favorite horror movies of the 80s. It's going to be showing at the Carolina Theater on the big screen, and I'm super excited to be able to see it on the big screen.
Same.
I don't know. I've never seen it, but the title sounds kind of vague to me. I don't really get it.
Oh, you will.
Just can't get enough of the stuff.
Yeah, this is going to be a real treat. Love being able to see movies like this on the big screen. So that'll be Ben's pick for next week. So tune back for our thoughts on The Stuff. And last, but certainly not least, we got to get paid, right, boys?
Gotta make that money.
So
Get
now
that insert colloquial term for cash here.
So it's time for a word from our sponsor.
This week, straight from the teat of the sponsor shelf, I shall bring you the sumptuous milk of our sponsor. This week is sponsored by the inevitable passing of time. Have you ever caught yourself reminiscing over the past and thinking, wow, how has a year flown by so quickly? The inevitable march of death carries on with time.
All those memories are dead. The past is dead. The future doesn't exist. All that exists is the maddening, endless present.
The empty nothingness shall prevail.
Eat Arby's.
This message brought to you by Arby's?
Arby's.
Sponsoring the podcast this week? Well, thank you as always for listening. Enjoy Arby's, and we will see you next time, and we'll have the stuff, so make sure that you bring the stuff.
Wait, but if you bring the stuff, but we have the stuff, I don't understand.
Then we'll all have the stuff.